What was that cliffhanger? You have to be kidding me right now. For the first time in the series, we have an episode that ends off on a completely unresolved note, and I can't believe I'll be waiting here for an entire week just to see what the hell just happened. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation review. The most important Mushoku Tensei review so far, I would say, and this week we're going to be talking about Episode 8, Turning Point 1. And I actually do have to admit that prior to this episode, prior to the entire series airing actually, I had heard about turning points and how in Mushoku Tensei there are parts of the story literally called turning points that signify huge, game-changing events in the story that will affect the entire structure and events going forward. So I had high expectations for this week, and I can't say that I was disappointed in the slightest, man. The first half of this episode lulls you into this false sense of security. It feels the same as always, and then in that last third, practically the final 6 or so minutes of the episode is just jam-packed with so much story, so much lore, so many new characters, so much tension. I was getting overwhelmed thinking about how much I was going to have to talk about in this week's review. So I think the first place I want to start is this glowing light, this glowing star in the sky. We left off last episode wondering what it was. It's been 2 years since then, and nobody really bothered to look into it. It wasn't bothering anybody, so I assumed there wasn't any point in messing with it until now. And we find out that this was some kind of catalyst for gathering and summoning mana all in one place. And I assume it's just been doing this for the last 2 years it was up in the sky. Or maybe it was waiting until the right time, I don't know, man. And that's basically where all of my confusion is coming from right now. We don't know why this thing popped up in the first place. We don't know the reason why it creates this enormous explosion of light. We don't know who is causing it. What is going on here, man? Honestly, I don't think Rudeus or Eris or even Ghislaine died in that light, but obviously it did something huge, and we're going to see the ramifications of that in next week's episode. The only hint we get about what this thing was doing and why it was gathering such huge amounts of mana is from Perugius, and we'll get into that, believe me, we'll get into that, who mentions that somebody might be seeking to undo the seal that was placed on the demon god Lapis, which essentially confirms my theory I mentioned a couple weeks ago about how the demon god Lapis is this eternal threat that has to be defeated multiple times throughout history. Although I was a little bit off with mentioning that the people who defeat him end up becoming Lapis themselves. That was just FF10 theory crafting talk there, but it's all incredibly huge, lore-heavy information, and I think that's just what I loved most about this week's episode. It felt like such a huge departure from everything that we've experienced so far, because we spent so long in this really insular, narrow perspective with Rudeus that this episode marks a gigantic shift where we're seeing perspectives from all over the world directed at this one enormous series-changing event. We feel just as overwhelmed as Rudeus does this week, and it's where all of those weeks of subtle world building and slow, methodical slice of life stuff really pays off. Speaking of those perspectives from all over the world, let's talk about that, man. Let's talk about all of the new characters that were introduced to this week. And for some, there's not as much to say, not because they're not as important or interesting, but just because we don't have nearly enough information about any of them to really make any kind of speculation or theory crafting. The first person we're introduced to is some unnamed dude in the middle of nowhere who seems to be part dragon based on the scales on his face, and who actually manages to fight and communicate with an actual dragon who ends up flying off themselves. And I don't know if this is just some random occurrence this dude happened to come across, but I'm super intrigued by it. I don't know what it means. He looks awesome, and his dragon-like appearance actually makes me wonder if he's related to the armored dragon king Perugius. And not only am I basing that on his part dragon appearance, but just his appearance overall looks like somebody who could be related to Perugius based on what we see of him a little bit afterwards, and I'll get into that in a second. The second person we meet is supposedly the great emperor of the demon world, Kishirika Kishirisu, and I'm not really sure what to make of this character specifically because she calls on her people to follow her, and yet she's completely alone in the middle of nowhere, so I'm not sure if she's just some kind of self-proclaimed emperor or if she actually is straight up the leader of all demons. I could honestly see it going either way, but right now I'm going to assume she's making it up, but I still assume that she's a crazy powerful and important figure in the overall story. And finally, we see Perugius in the flesh, the armored dragon king who we've heard so much about, who's been mentioned all the way since episode 1. He finally makes his appearance along with who I assume is one of his 12 followers that we heard about a couple episodes ago, Almanfi. Again, not really much to say about his appearance here right now, just because we have no idea what's going on, what his purpose is. I would assume he serves as some kind of guardian of his land, but he's also not especially cautious about how he goes about it, since he orders Almanfi to just murder anyone who seems suspicious, and Rudius would be dead right now if he didn't have a Sword King protecting him. Overall, there's a ridiculous amount to unpack here, but it's also something you really can't unpack until we get into these future revelations about who these characters actually are and what will come from this mana summoning light in the first place. All I know is that it's probably not good, and I can't wait for next week when we finally see the aftermath. What I hope isn't the focus of this episode, this absolute banger of an episode, is just more controversy surrounding Rudius, because I do want to get into that this episode, and I'm going to go right back to defending Rudius and how they handled it this week, because unlike in episode 6, when Rudius did something that was genuinely horrible and scummy down to the core, this week, I really didn't see much of an issue at all. In fact, I love how they handled Rudius's degeneracy this week, and the way it works into his development, and the way it works into how his relationship with Eris has progressed. Because essentially, there's a point in the episode where Eris is kind of surrendering herself to Rudius for his birthday. She clearly loves and cares about him a lot, and she gives him permission and consent to be more intimate. And obviously, Rudius, being the way he is, takes that as, oh, okay, we can just have sex right now. And obviously, the reason he thinks that is because he's a lot more mentally mature than her. And it leads to this believable misunderstanding where Eris says that he went too far. And unlike a few episodes ago, he genuinely feels bad. He feels terrible for assuming what he did and possibly really damaging his relationship with her. And I love this because it shows that now Rudius does have that same level of care and respect and love for Eris that he did for Sylphie when he apologized to her for going too far as well. And overall, I think it's just a great scene to showcase their relationship and how Rudius really is making visible progress towards becoming a better person. One thing I have seen mentioned about this scene is how Rudius's monologue about being a terrible person for how he treated Eris was a lot longer in the source material and a lot more exposing of how he really felt. And I'm going to throw some screenshots of his thoughts on the screen right now that some people sent me on the Discord, but what I want to say about this is that I do understand wishing that some of this dialogue wasn't cut out, because it does showcase even more so how awful he felt in that moment, how much he was considering how Eris's feelings were, and just generally the monologue makes you sympathize with Rudius a lot more. Something like that definitely would have been nice to help in this just really annoying focus on the controversy surrounding this series, but I still think they did a good job of showing all of those same things and all of those same thoughts, just in a more condensed format. Speaking of Eris and Rudius's relationship, we get a surprising amount of political and familial information about the Greirat family, and even some interesting and darker sides to Philip and his wife's history and backstory with those two. For one, we now know why Philip's wife Hilda was so silently malicious towards Rudius every time he was on screen, and it all ties back to these darker sides of the Greirat family. The Boreas family, which Philip belongs to, is one of the 4 main families of the Greirats, and they have a tradition that all men of of the household have to be raised in the head of the family's care, which meant that Hilda's 2 sons, Eris's 2 brothers, were taken from them at birth, which is why Hilda is understandably feeling a lot of frustration and anger seeing another family son just staying with them like it's nothing. It also creates this interesting situation where Hilda ends up actually caring about Rudius and wanting to use him to marry Eris and replace that gap as her son. So that's already painting the Greyrat family in a really negative light, and yet we haven't even gotten into the big, shady underdealings that are being plotted at this moment. We also learn that Paul belongs to another name of the Greyrat family called Notos, and not only is his brother the head of the Notos family, but he's apparently even more scum than Paul is, and there's a plot to overthrow him from the head of that household. Shady underdealings seem to be pretty consistent in this family as well, since Philip wants Rudius to marry Eris in order to throw a coup and have Rudius become the head of the Boreas family instead of his brother. It's honestly surprising how many political details they were able to fit into this already jam-packed episode, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where some of these things end up flourishing. Like, will Rudius actually end up becoming the head of the Boreas family? Will we ever get to meet Eris's brothers? There's lots of great setup for future events here, and that's nothing new to Mushoku Tensei. On the topic of small things being set up that have the potential to be much more important later down the line, the last thing I really want to talk about is Ghislaine. Not only did she kick so much ass this episode, not only do I love her even more than I already have the past few weeks, but we get some pretty big lore drops about her history and about her abilities. We learn that she trained under the sword god Galfarian, which, if you need a reminder, Sword God is the highest rank in the world for swordsmanship, so we can assume whoever this is she trained under is super duper important. But she also mentioned something about the honor of Doldia, and I'm going to assume that this is a location of some sort, her hometown maybe, but it could also possibly be a tribe or a clan of some sort that she used to belong to. Either way, I have a feeling it's again something we'll be exploring and seeing in the future of the series, and I enjoy hearing about it this early on. I also feel that way about her magical Chuni eye that lets her see mana. Like, what is this? I think all anime onlys were kind of assuming she just lost an eye at some point, but no, she still has it. It's just a magical eye, and it's awesome looking. I want to know what's going on with that. Is it part of this Doldia clan? Is it something you train over time? What is it, and how can I get one? Overall though, I don't think you need me to tell you over and over that this episode was amazing. It might be my new favorite episode in the series. Prepare to keep hearing that as long as Studio Bind keeps delivering, because my god, again, the animation, the production this episode, seeing a hand-animated dragon. I can't remember the last time I've seen a hand-animated dragon. The Ghislaine Almanfi sword fight, the character acting throughout the episode, seeing Roxy and Sylphie again, man, I didn't even mention that. Seeing Norn and Aisha grown up as little kids, it's just delightful. I loved this episode. I can't wait for next week. And one last thing I did want to mention is that it's nice that we finally see Rudius with his trademarked magical staff, Aqua Hardia. This has been all over the promotional material for this series, so I was kind of just waiting to finally see it get revealed, and I can't wait to see Rudius actually using it in these future battles, these future fights he goes through, because I have a feeling it's going to get a lot more crazy from this point onwards. That's been all from me though, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this wild, crazy turning point in the series, and if you're anime only, let me know where you think the story is going to go from this point onwards, because honestly, the sky's the limit, and I have a feeling we're going to be in for some surprises next week. If you want to continue the conversation with me and a bunch of other people who love this series as well, you can join our Discord server in the description below. You can also follow me on Twitter, subscribe for the future Mushoku Tensei episode reviews. I love you all, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.